Welcome back to Fashion here. So today I'm going to be doing my review of all of the F1 livery reveals for the 2025 F1 season. So of course, yesterday they had the F1 official season launch at the O2 Arena in London. All 10 teams were there, all 20 drivers, and they all did their kind of did this very interesting show, very reminiscent of kind of the team launches from the early 2000s. So today I'm going to be ranking all 10 liveries, and I'm also going to be briefly discussing both the liveries and what each team did for the season launch event at the O2 Arena. So starting off this ranking with the team that I've ranked as having the worst livery in 2010. Bit of a surprise after being the best ranked team last year, and that for me is Ferrari. Now, for Ferrari, of course, the big change in the livery from last year is the fact that the HP, which is basically a title partner, team partner, I guess you could call it, has a much bigger presence on the livery. You can see on the rear wing, front wing, as well on the engines. And last year they were on, I believe, the front and the rear wings from the Miami Grand Prix onwards, which is when that partnership started. But of course, they now have a much more prominent location on the engine cover. And yeah, I feel that unfortunately having both the HP logo with the white background and then have it be so kind of so disconnected from the rest of the car really makes this livery a bit of an eyesore for me. I saw a rendering online where the bottom half of the engine cover was red instead of white, and it actually looked quite a bit better. And very reminiscent. It was very reminiscent of kind of the Marlboro, barcode logos from kind of the mid early 2000s after Marlboro was kind of like officially banned because of the banning of the tobacco branding around much of the world at that time. But nonetheless, I thought, yeah, not a great livery for Lewis Hamilton's first season at Ferrari, and yeah, definitely a big downgrade from last year, and definitely from the start of last year. For their team launch, I think they talked about, they did this video, this montage talking about the team's history, and I thought, it was pretty good. The presentation of the drivers and everything was, I thought, pretty decent as well. Pretty smooth, pretty slick, and yeah, that was definitely not nothing to complain about there. But yeah, fortunately for me, the livery definitely a bit of a loser one for this year. Now, moving on to number 9, and for me that is going to be Sauber's. And this is, again, I think unfortunately, not necessarily the combination of the neon green and the black. I think you could make a pretty interesting livery. It just seems like the team really is lacking in terms of any kind of concrete identity. And as a result, the liveries kind of reflect that. It really feels like a really generic livery that you could basically make yourself in the F1 game. Just have the front of the car be green, back of the car be black, put a gradient on it about halfway through, and on some of the close-up shots, you could really, the change in the gradient from the green to the black was quite, I would say, jagged. Like, it wasn't really a great transition. It was kind of very choppy, where it'd be green and then dark green and then gray and then black instead of a nice kind of clear transition. I think it is a little bit better than last year where you had the weird swoops all over the place, but still I would say not a great livery. In terms of the team launch, they had this interesting thing with set with a whole bunch of drummers doing some kind of drum solo, although it was about 20 different people doing the drumming, obviously. And then beyond that, they had this kind of bit of a wonky CGI video where they had basically a CGI version of the car going around a track it wasn't, it was a pretty generic track. It wasn't like Silverstone or Spa or anything like that. It was just kind of a very generic video. I thought, it was all right, not too bad, but definitely a lot better than some of the teams that would come a bit later. Now, number 8 for my livery ranking is McLaren. Now, for McLaren, almost identical livery to last year. A lot of black, a lot of bare carbon. So for me, that's kind of a no in that regard. I also think that the contrast between the orange and the black/carbon is not great, and it basically just makes the car look like a Halloween costume or a pumpkin. So again, not really the most aesthetically pleasing, I think, color combination wise. I think, the overall design is okay. Definitely a lot better than, for example, Ferrari or even Sauber for that matter. But I think the combination of colors is just not there for me. If they had replaced the carbon with a white, I think like some of the special liveries they did, I think last season, it would have been a pretty nice looking livery. But unfortunately, they didn't do that. In terms of the launch event, I think they had one of the stronger ones. They had a bunch of historic cars. They had championship cars from Senna, Hakkinen, as well as Hamilton. I know I saw a couple jokes online about that. McLaren basically being a Ferrari. That was, of course, a nod to the Spygate scandal from 2007, 2008. But nonetheless, I thought the team launch was pretty nice and pretty well done. The car itself, again, okay. I guess one major change as well to the livery is that you have the MasterCard logo on the front wings, which I guess is, it looks all right. I think definitely better incorporated than the HP logo on the Ferraris. And of course, yeah, last year for McLaren, I ranked them 8th, so I'm just not super high on the livery overall. But given that they won the Constructors' Championship last year, it makes sense why they wouldn't really change it up that much. Number 7 for me is Aston Martin, and this is a big fall off from last year where I ranked them in 2nd. Two big changes to the livery, I guess. One is that the Madsen logo is now really prominently located on the engine, on top of the engine cover. So you can see kind of here at the top, similar to where the Duracell battery logo is on the Williams car. But for me, I think having these kinds of logos, especially in a different color, looks quite disjointed from the rest of the color scheme. On the previous year's Mercedes, for example, they would have the kind of maroon Ineos logo, and for me, it was a kind of a similar thing where it just really doesn't fit very well with the rest of the livery. The Aramco with the blue and the green on the rear wing is honestly fine, same with the front wing being black, but something I've definitely noticed, especially compared to past Aston Martins, is there's a lot more black or bare carbon. So you can see, for example, on the side pods are almost entirely black, whereas, for example, in the 2022 Aston Martin, it was basically all green, and it was basically all the way back to the edge, the trimming on the edge of the floor. That was all green. So definitely a lot less color as well. Which again, I think without the Madsen would, I think, look all right, to be honest, but still, I think a little bit of a step back down from last year. In terms of team launch, I thought it was interesting. They definitely went with a unique angle, leaned really heavily into the James Bond element. The CGI for that James Bond element was quite bad, I must say. It really felt like something from like Sharknado, or like some CGI from like the early 2000s. But nonetheless, it was all right. They had some musical performances incorporated into it. I'm not sure if that was a FOM decision or an Aston Martin decision. It seems like the teams basically could do what they want, but that the inclusion of a musical component to the Aston launch as well as another team was a little bit odd, and I think a little bit disjointed for me because it felt too different compared to the Aston Martin. If they had stuck with the James Bond and kept that kind of theme consistent through the entire team launch, I think it would have been a little bit stronger. All right, now going on to number 6 for my livery ranking is Mercedes. And this is a team that I ranked as 7th last year. So actually a slight improvement, I think. And again, I kind of implied this earlier, but the slight improvement is the fact that the Ineos logo is not on the car. And therefore, the whole livery, I think, feels a lot more well put together. It feels a lot more complete. The coloring itself, I think, is okay. We haven't seen a great rendering of the car. This is a shot from the production yesterday. But again, you can see that there's the pretty, at this point, typical Petronas kind of teal turquoise stripe going along the car, to silver to black for different parts, again with the black gradient at the back. And again, I think it looks all right. Probably not quite as good as their 2019 Mercedes, or even their 2020 and 2021 Mercedes, in my opinion. But still, a decent livery. Team launch, very corporate. They had a really slick video, really well edited. And then they tried to do some kind of choreographed pit stop with actors instead of a real pit stop. I thought, if you're going to do that, it wouldn't be too hard to just have your own crew get out there and do an actual pit stop with the show car. I'm sure it's possible. But yeah, it just looks like a really, really slow pit stop, and not super impressive in that respect. All right, moving on to number 5, and that is Alpine. Now, for Alpine's livery, I think it looks quite nice. Definitely a big improvement from last year where there had so much black on the car. And last year I ranked it 9th, so this year's 5th is a pretty big improvement. I like the blue. I think it works a lot better with the pink, and it's a big improvement from their 2022 logo, which was the first 2022 livery, which was the first one to try to incorporate the BWT branding with the Alpine branding. And I think the pink and the red for that livery was quite badly matched together, but for this one I think it's much better. And basically just going blue with the light pink I think is actually a pretty nice logo. I would have liked if the BWT was in white instead of blue. I think it would have matched up a bit better with some of the sponsors on the upper part of the engine cover. Like, I can't read what it says, any I think it says, but I think if this was in white, I think it would match quite a bit better with the whole livery as a whole. But nonetheless, livery I think looks pretty nice. Definitely a big improvement from last year. Team launch, on the other hand, was definitely quite something. So they had Brian Tyler, the composer who basically composed the F1 theme song that you basically hear at the start of every F1 session, doing some kind of DJ set. But based on what I've seen online, it seems with those kinds of things, it's quite common where the person doing the DJ set is not actually doing anything, and everything's basically just been pre-recorded. So they had Brian Tyler there by himself at the end of the stage with, his DJ equipment, and he was just kind of he was basically DJing one of his songs or something, and it wasn't even the F1 theme. This went on and on and on and on for quite a few minutes, and definitely used up quite a lot of Alpine's time. And while this was going on, they had basically the screen at the back. So a lot of the other teams that did just video only for the first part of their launch, they would have the video basically playing on either the screen at the back or along basically this box screen that they had in the middle, so that the people who were there could watch live. Whereas for Alpine, they never cut away from that to doing the direct picture, which is what they did for others watching on TV. So instead, you basically had the small, basically screen at the back of which had the video playing, and then you had Brian Tyler basically in the foreground, so you couldn't really see the video that well. So I think that was also again a bit of a mistake on their part. But yeah, definitely one of the strangest team launches, but nonetheless, I think livery looks pretty solid. Number 4, for me, that's Williams, and then again, kind of an evolution of last year's livery. A lot of the same concepts. The Duracell livery is still there. The one big change, of course, is the Atlassian title sponsorship, which again features very, very prominently on the engine cover. I ranked this 3rd last year, ranked it 4th this year, maybe for novelty, maybe because the novelties worn off a bit, but nonetheless, I think still overall pretty strong logo. The team launch itself was pretty standard, not super special. They basically had James Vowell go out ahead, say some stuff, and then introduce the 2 drivers, and they had a bunch of basically actresses, basically like extras in kind of race suits with kind of the golf helmets on as well, which was a bit strange because the initial thought was that that was Albon and Sainz, except then suddenly we realized that there was way more than 2 of them. But nonetheless, I think, a decent launch, and again, a video with a nod to their history, much like McLaren and Ferrari did. All right, moving on to number 3, and that is Haas. Now for Haas, I think really, really solid logo, or livery, I should say. And again, I think a really solid evolution of kind of the current trend that they've had since 2023, I should say. Last year, I ranked this livery 6. Again, I think it's a slight improvement from that one, but again, very, very similar. Only real change is that the Haas on the engine cover is written in black on the white, and I think, white does feature a little bit more prominently on this year's logo. For the team launch, I thought it was, I keep saying logo instead of livery. I'm sorry about that. But in terms of the team launch, I think it was, again, a little bit meh. They had this video with some influencer narrating that was really trying to hype up Haas as an American team. And to me, that really felt like it was kind of a way to try to attract more American fans to the team before Cadillac joins in 2026. Again, I think Cadillac to a general audience is much more well known as a brand, and much more well associated with America as well. So I think for a casual American viewer, from next year. If they want to cheer for an American team, it would be more natural to simply choose Cadillac over Haas. I know Haas has a presence in NASCAR as well, but with that, Haas is the American team element. It really felt like that's kind of the reason why they were pushing it so much harder than they have in past years. But yeah, other than that, they had interviews with the drivers. They had the car come out, and of course, they did some rotations on the platform it was on, so you could see what it looked like from all angles, which I thought was kind of cool. Some of the other teams didn't do that. All right, now moving on to the top two, and maybe if you've been paying attention, you've realized that the two Red Bull teams have not shown up yet. And I think, honestly, their liveries are probably some of the stronger ones on the grid, kind of objectively speaking, or more, I should say subjectively speaking, because realistically, everyone's going to have their own opinion about that. Now, for number two, I have gone with Red Bull, and surprise, surprise, the red livery is exactly the same one that's been for the last 10 years. Not a whole lot to comment on that. I think really from a livery perspective, the only big difference is that all of Checo's sponsors are basically not going to be there, of course, because he's not driving this year, and they probably added a couple of new ones to kind of cover that space that they now have empty. The team launch itself was quite odd. They basically announced, and this is something that I noticed that the Racing Bulls did as well, is that basically Christian Horner came out basically onto the stage and said that, talked about how excited they were while being booed by the British audience, and said that we were going to do some kind of homage to car culture. So they did this kind of fairly slick video, I would say, basically talking about paying tribute to car culture in the UK with all kinds of different kind of cars, whether it be that your initial D kind of drifting cars or a couple other ones. I'm not super familiar, so I can't go into the exact details, but they had these cars where the suspension was going up and down and doing all sorts of funky stuff. They had some BMX bikers as well, and that was kind of and then it kind of followed a montage or the video of the Red Bull truck basically making its way to O2 Arena while more and more people kind of came along joining the parade, so to speak. And then when the car came out, they basically had the car and then Liam and Max walking out, and they had this massive crowd of extras and dancers basically coming along behind them, which I thought was kind of odd, kind of awkward. Yeah, both the drivers looked, especially Max, looked quite unhappy with the whole thing. And then there were no interviews, which was really surprising. It seems like Red Bull basically decided that they weren't going to do any driver interviews. They were the only team with it who didn't do that. And so basically after the car came to the end of the stage, Max and Liam came to the end, that was the end, and they moved on to the next team. So again, a lot of people thought it was some kind of technical glitch, but apparently it seems it was an intentional decision by Red Bull to not do driver interviews. Now, for number one, of course, that is going to be Racing Bulls, who I think probably, you could argue, tied with Alpine, had the biggest change in livery from 2024. You would notice as well, very heavily inspired by the 2021 Red Bull special Red Bull livery that was run at the 2021 Turkish Grand Prix, the so-called white Red Bull, where it's basically the Red Bull logo, but the navy blue is replaced by white. I think it looks very, very slick, and they've added their own kind of special elements with the kind of bulls kind of hopping off the back, similar to the Mercedes stars. I think it looks quite nice. And yeah, on the front wing as well, while they have the Red Bull logo on the engine cover, they also have it on the front wing, very, very similar to the parent team Red Bull. So overall, I think Red Bull Racing Bull's livery looks quite slick. I think it's one of the best ones. Again, if I come back in eight months' time and were to rank them again, maybe it might slip down again. I think that novelty factor always means that the cars that change their livery quite a bit will always be ranked a little bit higher than they would be, if you waited, a couple months. But nonetheless, I think really, really solid livery overall. The team launch was kind of funny. I think they were kind of making fun of themselves and the fact that no one knew what to call them last year. So they had this scripted video where they had a British comedian basically talking to people on the street. Although in almost all those cases, it's going to be just scripted. People who would either pay to kind of or be paid to basically take part in it with fairly scripted answers. But nonetheless, thought it was a little mildly funny. So there you go. There's my ranking of the 10 F1 liveries for the 2025 F1 season. I think, overall, I think a slightly better looking grid compared to 2024. I think I was looking at my list for last year earlier today, and it really felt like there was 5 or 6 teams where it was a predominantly black livery, and it definitely feels like this year we've kind of moved away from that. You had Alpine basically adding a lot more color to their car. Mercedes are about the same. Haas, again, a little bit about the same. So a bunch of the other teams that added were primarily black last year. It feels like they've added maybe perhaps a little bit more color. And I think Alpine as well, just going from almost all black to primarily blue and pink, I think really helps as well. In terms of other aspects of the team season launch, I thought the main host, Jack Whitehall, was decent. Based on what I read beforehand, it seemed like expectations on his abilities as MC were pretty low, but I thought he did a decent job. Was able to make some jokes and even do some roasts of certain individuals associated with F1 as well as F1 itself, which I thought was kind of funny. Besides that, I think there were some parts that were a little bit cringe-inducing. I think, like, for example, the Whitehall basically spent too much time, I guess, perhaps objectifying Charles Leclerc and kind of making him feel awkward at points, calling him like, the most handsome person on the grid or all sorts of other things. And yeah, so I think, for a first attempt, and I think as a once in 5 years, once in 10-year event, I think it's all right. I don't think this is going to be something that will happen every year. You definitely had less talking by the team staff and the team principals than you do normally for these kinds of events. The amount of time that each team had was quite short compared to their usual ones. So I do think that, from a sponsor perspective, I think, as well as perhaps from the teams as well, wanting to have a little bit more control, I think likely they're going to be going back to doing their own, special ones next year. Although that being said, given that 2026 will be the start of new regulations, it's possible that F1 will want to do something special again next year. So there you go. There's my ranking of all 10 new liveries for the 2025 F1 season, as well as kind of my general thoughts on the season launch. So anyway, if you're still watching at this point, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.